Hello and welcome to the Society with Fatma Shaheen at PTV World. Today on our show, we'll be talking about this extremely important, very burning, pressing issue in Pakistan, which then goes to the very core of humanity per se. Too. We'll be talking about this growing societal challenge where we now unfortunately see more and more children, actually letting go of their parents, distancing them from themselves, or even for that matter, neglecting them, abusing them, or for that matter, even abandoning them in their old age as well. We'll be talking about how we do see the status of elderly and senior citizens in the Pakistani society today. In this regard, we'll also be talking about the latest trends that we do observe in various classes, in various socio-economic classes, so to speak, because we do understand the fact that this is that one issue which then transcends beyond financial boundaries. In this regard, we'll also be talking about the various reasons because of which we then unfortunately do see there to be more and more cases of parental abandonment coming forward in this regard too. We'll be talking about the influence of media, more particularly social media in this regard as well. And then when we do talk about the rights of senior citizens in the country today, what kind of laws and policies do we have in place to safeguard them? And in this regard then of course we also cannot ignore the fact that when it comes to the Pakistani state's international obligations, there is an international obligation on the Pakistani state so as to advocate for more age-inclusive policies. To what extent has the state done just that? That is also something upon which we'll be shedding light today. Overall, we'll be talking about the need for there to be perhaps a greater support social systems when it comes to looking after people in their old age in the society today, and also of course to change that very mindset which unfortunately perhaps a lot of people, young people more particularly, still have in our society, one which is then based on perhaps perceiving elderly care and looking after their old parents as a burden as opposed to being perhaps a blessing. All of this today, that too with an extremely eminent panel. Let me introduce you to my today's panel. My first panelist for today's show is Miss Halima Ali. She's an analyst and she's also a social worker. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us, Miss Halima. Alongside her, I have Miss Aliza Masood Raza. She's a youth activist. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. My third panelist for today's show is Miss Naila Daud. She's a homemaker, she's a writer, and she's also an entrepreneur. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, madam. And via telephone line, we'll be joined by Dr. Muhammad Amjad Saqib Saab, who, as we all know, is a prominent social entrepreneur. He's also the founder of Ahuvat. Assalamu alaikum, sir, and welcome to the show. Now, before we start the discussion on today's topic, let's have a look at this brief report.
In today's evolving world, we see a unique blend of traditional values and modern lifestyle, creating opportunities for greater mutual understanding. This mix enriches our society, especially when it comes to emotional care for our seniors. Empathy and compassion are crucial in reconnecting generations and building meaningful bonds. Fortunately, we are witnessing promising initiatives in elderly care. New institutional solutions are being developed, offering family support while maintaining the respect and honor traditionally given to elders. Communities are also playing a pivotal role, coming together to promote intergenerational support, strengthening family ties, and ensuring our seniors feel valued. Moreover, there is growing awareness around the issue of parental neglect, and society is responding positively. Inspiring movements are fostering environments where seniors and elders are cherished and cared for, ensuring that the dignity and emotional well-being of every elder remains a priority. The future looks brighter as these initiatives continue to spread, fostering a culture of empathy and respect for the older generation, strengthening the fabric of our society.
Welcome back from the report. Now, to get the conversation started, sir, I would like to start the show with you, Amrit Saab. At a very basic level, when we do talk about this very core societal issue, that too from a social perspective. So, being a social worker yourself, what are the main reasons in your view because of which we now see perhaps more and more people, letting go of their parents, distancing themselves from their parents, that too when they perhaps need them the most? Is this an issue which then cuts across all classes, or do you feel that this is something which is then, of course, basically confined to one particular class? How would you then comment on this issue?
But as per my observation, elderly abandonment is more prevalent in upper classes, especially among the children who have left their country because of economic reasons or in search of greener pastures. They love their country and their parents, but they are in a great dilemma. That is, to lead a comfortable life, raise their own families, or come back. We cannot attribute this phenomenon to one section of society. This depends on individual and person to person. This is entirely one's special and personal values that determine his her relationship with parents.
Right, sir. But it then goes back to the very basics, the very core of our society as well. And of course, the kind of society and culture that we do live in, it is one culture which then stresses upon the need to look after elderly and senior citizens, especially when they do grow old. On which I'll come to you, madam, and I would want you to add to this further. So when we do talk about this more so from an Islamic perspective, what responsibility does our religion, Islam, then place both on the male child as well as on the female child when it comes to looking after their parents in old age?
Well, this responsibility is deeply embedded in the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah and the Hadith. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Isra, "Worship me alone." And after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "And treat your parents kindly. And if one or both of them reaches old age, don't even say oof in front of them." And you have to realize that this is an obligation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given.
Right.
And this can be further explained in a hadith in which Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said 3 times, "He will be humiliated." And the companion said, "Who, O Messenger of Allah?" And he said, "That person when his parents, either one of them or both of them, reaches old age and he doesn't enter Jannah by serving them."
Right.
So this is our answer.
Right. But the thing is, Miss Salima, that when we do talk about this responsibility, and if you were then to make a comparison, hypothetically speaking,
Yeah.
if somebody is not that financially well off, they have
Yeah.
limited resources, so how does this responsibility then downplay with regards to taking care of both the parents? Is it not true that perhaps from an Islamic perspective, this responsibility would be given preference when it comes to an ailing mother as opposed to an ailing father?
Well, from the Islamic perspective, the rights are always given to the mother, because the mother is the person who has made all the sacrifices, not only through the pregnancy, but from weaning the child, all the early years of the child, bringing the child up, raising them. So she has to be given preference. The father and the mother's role is defined. He's the one who has to work outside the home. He's the bread earner. And the mother's the one who has to raise the children. So in old age, she should be taken care of.
Right. On which I'll come to you, Aliza, and I would want you to add to this further. So when we do talk about this from a youth perspective, considering that you are the youngest on the panel here today, what reasons would you attribute to this growing societal challenge? Is it because of technology? Because a lot of times we now see technology has, in ways more than one, changed our socio-cultural norms. Has it in any way, in your opinion, also led to this growing issue of parental neglect and abandonment?
I think it's fair to say that technological advancement is very important. I think it is inevitable. And instead of us, isolating it and telling it that this is the problem, that's not really the solution either. I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem is the fact that the responsibilities in terms of bifurcation, when you said earlier, is that a man and a woman have an obligation towards their own children too. So Islam also talks about the rights of the parents on their children. So now you need to understand that technology has little to do with this. This has more to do with how are you going to balance you taking care of your parents versus you taking care of your own family.
But you see, then there is a contrary argument to that as well, which is that just because people are now resorting to using greater technology, they are more influenced by social media, by West, and that is an argument which others raise, just talking about this objectively. Perhaps they are, getting far from their typical Eastern traditional values that way too. And also, just because they are more invested with their devices, they would prefer to spend time with their devices as opposed to having real life, honest conversation conversations too. Madam, how would you respond to that, since you are a homemaker, you've had that privilege of living in a joint family system, that too for so many years? How do you overall see our, socio-cultural dynamics changing over a period of time, and that in turn adding to this growing issue of parental neglect, that too in old age?
I think that over the years, um, we are now emphasizing more upon IQ or the intelligence quotient. Less, what I would really give preference to is emphasizing the EQ. And EQ is not emotional quotient. By EQ, I mean the empathy quotient, the relationship quotient. We have fallen short on that. And I think that it's my generation who's at fault, because we sacrifice the empathy quotient at the door of the intelligence quotient by encouraging our children, say 25 years ago, to go abroad and lead their own lives. Well, we were also impressed, and so were the children. We pushed them into following the loads of money culture. There was more money that side of the ocean.
Right.
And we also pushed them because there were more conveniences over there, and we also pushed them because there were more chances of career development.
Indeed, that's very rightly put by yourself, because then it can be a combination of factors, be it urbanization, be it migration, be it changing lifestyle preferences. But it goes without saying that even with these different, reasons, at the end of the day, we have to learn to have that right balance between giving due time to our elderly parents too. Alisa, I would want you to comment on this further, but from your own youth perspective. So when we do talk about this from your own perspective, a lot of times we see children choose to distance themselves from their parents just because they feel they are not valued. Elderly people don't give due consideration to their opinions. At times, more than one, they might be dismissive of them as well. So how would you comment on this? Because then again, of course, here, opinions of young people like yourself, they also become extremely important too.
I think that's a very good question, because this is about the intergenerational gaps, especially in terms of conversation. It would be unfair to say that there are children out there that are not abused, when that's not true. But then there are also parents that are abused. That conversation needs to happen. It's very important for us to have that empathy, to have that sort of respect for our elders. But it's really important for us to understand at the same time that the abuse and the parenting faults that happen, that's actually the reason why children turn away from their parents in the first place.
Right. So basically, then we do need to address this from more of a causes view, so that we can have adequate interventions in place by that virtue too. Amjad, I would want you to comment on this further. There is this growing debate in the Pakistani society, which is that about sending your parents to old homes, sending your parents to nursing homes when they do grow old and vulnerable. Whereas, of course, there is that one quarter which perhaps might be in support of this for whatever reasons they might so have. There is that strata of the Pakistani society which is very strongly opposed to it, primarily because it does run counter to our very social fabric of having a family institution intact, to our core fundamental Eastern traditional values. How do you, as a social worker, as a social entrepreneur, look at this issue? Which end of the spectrum would you fall?
Yes, nursing homes do provide a solution, but I will urge people to keep their parents with them. In some critical cases where medical care cannot be provided at home, the elderly may be shifted to nursing homes, but the kind of emotional support they need, that comes only from the children. I know a large number of people who have left their careers, very brilliant and bright careers, and have decided to spend their lives with their parents, seeing them as the number one priority in life.
That's right, sir. But ideally, do you not feel that, taking cue or following lead from that of other countries like the US, the UK, and of course Japan in that regard too, perhaps we can have that balancing act of at one point having ideal family care, but, balancing it with professional elderly care at the other end too. But moving on, when we do talk about this issue more so from a mental health perspective, we might see old parents who have been abandoned. They might, come across emotional stress. It might have a very negative negative impact on their psychological well-being too. But we also see then children on the converse, they might be very guilty of such acts too, because they might not want to do it, but they might be forced to do it because of these circumstances. So what importance does mental health then acquire in addressing this issue? Because clearly, if we do look at this from a mental health perspective, we can possibly find solutions to it too.
Mental health awareness is important, but support to elderly and their care is a different subject altogether. The guilt factor is there. Abandoning elderly parents can never be appreciated. It is nothing less than a great moral crime. We should look back and remember our own childhood before ignoring, abandoning, or ill-treating our mother or father.
Right, sir, your point is noted. On which I'll come to you, Ms. Halima, and I would want you to add to this further.
Yes.
So overall, when we do talk about this from a parent's viewpoint, because you yourself are a mother, how do you propose can we then address this issue where at one point children complain that they might have aggressive or abusive parents, but they still have to take care of them, which is a given, but they do it in a manner which then of course doesn't harm their own mental health? How do you propose can we have that balance between looking after elderly parents but doing it in a way where the child themselves, they also draws, healthy boundaries for themselves?
Unfortunately, there are parents who abuse their children. They have toxic relations with their families, and it's detrimental to the mental and the emotional health of the children. And these children often suffer mental health issues. They become stressed, which can lead to drug abuse also later on in life, and they have low self-esteem. But because it's a religious obligation on the children, so they have to at least do the basic minimum in caring for their parents, and they can do this by, they can pay for help if they can afford it. If they can't, they can request some other family member to take care of them. But they can't escape.
Just leave them.
They can't. Yeah, they
Right.
can't escape these responsibilities, and also they can keep some emotional distance, so that their own mental health isn't affected while taking care of the parents.
Right, madam. Coming towards you, Aliza, I would want you to add to this. So when we do talk about this from a legal and a policy viewpoint, we do understand that, in Islamabad, we do have the Senior Citizens Act, and then various provincial welfare laws, they have also been passed. But also as a lawyer, how would you comment on the effectiveness of these laws? What kinds of rights, what kinds of protections and safeguards do these laws actually give to elderly population in Pakistan? And to what extent do you practically do see them getting enforced?
I think as a general rule, we understand that Pakistan has an implementation problem, and it's no different when we talk about these particular legislations. Do I think they go in the right direction? Yes. But I think this conversation needs to be more of a sociological conversation that needs to happen, because this is about the community. When we look at different countries such as Malaysia or any other country, they have a lot of these community benefits, whether they're volunteer programs, whether they're dealing with old age homes, whether they're dealing with elderly people grouping, because
Right.
those things need to
They focus on
happen.
rehabilitation of elderly people.
Absolutely.
In Denmark as well, I was reading
Yeah.
about this very interesting human concept where young people, they are given an opportunity to actually borrow and sit with elderly people so as to learn from their wisdom as opposed to
Yes.
books. So that is such an innovative way to look at this. Madam, I think she's raised some very valid points that when we talk about solutions, the solutions, they need to be very community centric. They need to have a socialist perspective to them. So as a writer yourself, what role do you feel can Pakistani media play in this regard, especially when it comes to promoting the right narratives which are not based on mere sensationalism?
Well, the media is a very powerful tool. It can do a lot. I would again emphasize the empathy factor, the empathy quotient. And because you see, as a society, as senior citizens, are we ready to break out of our family circles? I don't think so. You are talking of advanced countries, the social security systems they have, better legislation, drugs, provision of drugs easily and all that. But what a senior citizen in Pakistan today is not looking to actually lean on a son's shoulders. The senior citizen of Pakistan today is looking to walk along his son, looking not to be told, given the newspaper to read. He's looking to share a joke with his son.
That's right, madam. But then do you not feel that this needs to be then addressed vis-a-vis the root causes of this very issue? Looking at the causes and then, of course, nipping the evil in its bud too.
Of course, we have to look at the causes. Why are children, I don't want to use the term abandonment. Why are children today ready to forsake their relationships with their parents for the sake of bettering their own lives? What is it that has made them prioritize things, say even their own children and their spouses over their parents?
Right.
There has to be a balance. Were they not taught as children? Did they see any examples of their parents?
Right, madam. Aliza, I would want you to add to this further. So when we do talk about having that right balance between not only looking after your old parents, but also having that own space of yours, how particularly do you feel can that be done? A lot of times we see that, social media perhaps is blamed for widening that intergenerational gap. How would you comment on that?
I think it could be one of the factors. I think largely enough, it's also about the way a child is raised. If a child is not raised in an environment where they have seen a very connected family, that resentment can actually grow. You do not want to take care of a parent that has been abusive towards you. And so that resentment, that intergenerational gap, it only widens and widens. And I think that's one of the biggest factors in terms of why parents feel like there's this disconnect. And I would agree with my panelists here that say that empathy is really important. I think as a child, it's really important for you to exercise that empathy for parents because they're at this age where they can't really change. They're elderly, they suffer from a lot of different problems. And as far as balance is concerned, I would like to respectfully say that the balance with your family, which is your unit and your children, is just as important because that's something that you've created on your own. So whilst parental rights are there, you are solely responsible for your children. And so I think keeping that in line and making sure that we don't see this as an issue where we're all entitled. And I think that entitlement needs to disappear and it needs to take a backseat.
Right. So it goes back to basically teaching younger generations the very core of our socio-cultural practices and our religious principles too. Madam, I would want you to add to this, but more so from the viewpoint of being a mother. Now, a lot of times we see that the family unit that we do all live in, mothers inevitably are those people who you turn to whenever you have any kind of issues, whenever there is any kind of fallout. They are the ones who are actually bridging the gaps. So in cases like these, how do you propose can mothers then take lead so as to do away with this issue of parental neglect and abandonment?
Well, like as I said previously, the mother is the first teacher and she's a role model of the children. So whatever the mother does, the children are going to emulate. So if she is dutiful to her parents or to her elderly in-laws, the children are going to do the same when it's their turn. And I feel the mother is the person who can bond the family together. She has to create opportunities for the children to get together with their elderly grandparents, even simple tasks like storytelling or playing some board game together. I mean, I spent years with my grandparents and I learned so many skills. And one thing I learned from my grandmother that I'd love to share is the sense of gratitude.
Right.
And my grandmother was brought up during the war days. And whenever she accomplished any simple task, she would raise her hands and thank Allah, even if it was making a cup of tea. And that memory of seeing her raising her hands has remained with me throughout. So these life skills, these things are just blessings that you can never thank Allah enough for.
And you need to cherish them for what they are.
So, yes,
Right.
and I found through research that children who spend time with their grandparents, they have more social skills and they have better mental and emotional health. So there's advantages throughout.
Right, right. Definitely. And these are things that we do need to cherish that way as well. I'll come to you, madam. How would you comment on what she said? Because you see, then again, this goes back to my earlier question to you as well, that when we do talk about this from the perspective of preserving our family system, that too by having joint family system, so to speak, how important would it be to perhaps, get that trend back? Because a lot of times we see that children who are growing up in such family systems, they might have better Eastern traditional values, but also they might be more respectful towards their parents, rather grandparents too, in older age as well.
Certainly, children who are living growing up in the same house as their grandparents, I think they have a wider vision. They get more wisdom as they grow up, because they are now, they are getting wisdom or input from two generations. It's very easy to be at a generational gap with your parents, and some people say with their grandparents. But in a way, grandparents, I think, can diminish the generation gap, because they would be, at the top of the tier. They would be seeing these two generations with another perspective, with their own wisdom. And they are in a better way to bridge the gap. And children living with grandparents learn to bridge gaps.
Right, madam. On which I'll come to you, Amjad Saab, and I would want you to add to this further. Now, we all agree on the simple fact, which is that we have seen there have been growing concerns about looking after your old parents. And this is something which is then not very rampant in the Pakistani society only. It is, of course, a global concern, so to speak, as well. But when it comes to moving towards its proposed solutions, what do you feel would be the best way forward, both structurally as well as culturally in this way? Do you feel that at some point we do perhaps need better financial assistance programs or welfare programs, or do you feel that it goes back to the society? It's all about revamping and reshaping our societal attitudes.
There is no doubt that aging is a global concern, but we are fast abandoning our Eastern values. Our cultural and family values are being adversely influenced by the West. We need to come back, see inwards, identify the true spirit of East, take pride in it, and inculcate this spirit in our new generation. Welfare programs cannot be implemented from the top. Care should begin from family, which is the basic and fundamental building block of our society.
Aliza, I would want you to add to what he just said. So when we do talk about this from the viewpoint of course, the government working so as to not only financially support, but also to better rehabilitate elderly persons in the Pakistani society. Overall, if you were to make a world comparison in this way, we do come across different countries taking different approaches. There are those countries which are very particularly focused upon, elevating poverty, financially supporting such people. Then that group of countries too, which are very focused upon improving health care for the elderly persons, or for that matter, even better rehabilitate them back in the society too. So which end of the spectrum do you believe does Pakistan fall? What are the strides that the Pakistani government has taken in this regard, and what do you feel are those steps that we still do need to take?
I think there could be a great sense of improvement, and I think Pakistan is facing this challenge as a newer challenge, because I think it's more unprecedented in the years now. It's being reported more. It's coming in forms of public interest litigation. Of course, there are different initiatives like the Baitul Mal, and then we have the Social Welfare Department, which is primarily very much responsible and plays a very pivotal role in making sure that elderly people get their benefits, and there are a lot of things with regards to the initiatives that they can take. However, I would stick to my earlier point in terms of the community playing its part. And I understand that the government has a role to play, but I think the collaboration with NGOs, collaboration with different volunteer groups that can help bridge that gap, that can help bring out a more inclusive
space.
Even
with media in this regard, so as to change the narrative too.
Absolutely. I think the media, as well as the collaboration with different NGOs and different partners that kind of make a society a more inclusive space for elderly people as a whole, is very important. And I think the government has taken an initiative to do that, but yes, I think there's still a longer way to go.
Right, and slowly and steadily we will get there, definitely.
Yes.
Madam, coming towards you and moving towards the end of the show, so my last question to you would be that, when it comes to wrapping up today's conversation, how do you propose, as a mother, as a parent yourself, can we get past that typical societal mindset which still unfortunately believes looking after old people, looking after elderly persons is more of a burden as opposed to perhaps being a blessing?
I'd like to share it from the Islamic perspective. This is part of Hukuk al-Ibad, and this is the rights of people. So when a mother takes care of her family, her parents, or even her aged in-laws, she is obeying Allah's command, right? Secondly, she's paying back to her parents who raised her. And thirdly, she's acting as a role model to her children. So there's benefit all around.
Right.
And I'd like to just share a hadith in which Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, the best people amongst us are those who are most beneficial to others. So in this role, she's being beneficial to her whole family.
Right, and these are the values which we need to then revisit with the younger generations, more so from the viewpoint of teaching them the same. So you see, here again, the educational institutions, they have a very important responsibility vested upon themselves as well. Right, madam. On which I'll come to you, Aliza, and moving towards the end of the show. So my last question to you would be that we do understand the fact that Pakistan has a commitment under the UN SDGs so as to advocate for age-inclusive development and policies per se. But as a lawyer yourself, to what extent have you seen the Pakistani state do just that? And when it comes to advocating for the welfare of elderly people, what role can people like yourself play? Because a lot of times we see that, countries more than one, more particularly Norway, I was reading about this, young people are actually vested with this responsibility to bridge that gap between the elderly persons and the youth per se.
The United Nations has several SDGs that talk about age inclusivity. And as far as Pakistan's concerned, I think because this is a pressing issue now, it's more burning, it's more reported now, and we've seen it in terms of public interest litigation, we've seen it in terms of different initiatives as well. I think one of the biggest roles that the youth can play in terms of advocating for it is using social media to their advantage, and also taking part in community initiatives and taking not just part in already existing initiatives, but taking an own initiative to start them, whether it's making sure they have book reading clubs with the elderly people, whether it's going out to just watch a movie with them.
Right.
Because
spending time
with them. And I think that's why countries like Scandinavian countries like Norway, they have that, because they understand that these people, they actually lack that human touch. They lack, they're lonely. They just need companionship. And so a lot of these initiatives on a social level, on a community-based level, they're very important. And I think the youth has the biggest role to play there.
Right. When we do talk about this in terms of perhaps improving our level of implementation and enforcement of these policies, having such social support systems in place, that would also have a very positive impact on this. Because you see, then laws and society, they go hand in hand. You only have laws in a particular society so as to change the societal attitudes and vice versa. Madam, coming towards you and to wrap up today's conversation, so when it comes to giving the audience out there your practical advice, especially when it comes to better connecting or even reconnecting with your parents in the event that you have distanced yourself from them, what practical tips would you give to them in this regard?
Look, as a senior citizen, I can't say that I can come up to their level. But as a senior citizen, I have learned personally to become my own person, to be my own person. The result of that will be my children will become their own persons, and so will their own children become me persons. Now, what does me person mean? It means somebody, I need emotional support, I need to joke with my children, family gathering, but I also have my own interest in life. Barring issues of health, mobility, finances, still anybody, whatever financial strata they belong to, they can have their own interest in life, which will give them a certain amount of dignity and respect they will be able to take from their children and the youngsters.
Right.
You
But
see,
for that, they need to learn to look at things from the young people's perspective. It has to be a two-way communication at the end of the day, because a lot of
yes.
times young people complain that, elderly people, they might not give due consideration to their worldviews, to their perspectives too. So it is a circular argument.
It's a circular argument. It has to work both ways. Children should never get the impression that the senior person in the family has lost utility. You see, and that now the onus lies on the senior person to not sort of let the cat out of the bag that I have lost my utility. I have to maintain my utility in whatever way, in a
Right.
congenial manner.
Right. And basically that can only be done if you lead by way of example. Coming towards you, Amjad Saab, and before we conclude today's show, my last question to you would be that looking at this issue from a solution-oriented viewpoint, what do you propose should education institutions then do, especially when it comes to having perhaps, social responsibility-motivated curriculums per se? If the children, they are taught about the importance of having a right family unit in place, about the importance of respecting their elderly parents, that too at an elderly age, do you not feel that we can, as a society, actually steer clear of such issues? How would you look at this?
Social responsibility curriculum may be a good idea, but how can we teach such things at school if they are not practiced at home? State or society is not responsible for everything. The best place to design a social responsibility curriculum with special reference to elderly is home. It should be conceived and designed in our homes. Of course, this should be reinforced by teachers in school, but the importance of home cannot be ignored. If I love and care for my parents, we may not need any such additions in our course curriculums, and we can definitely build a better society where elderly are not abandoned, they are loved and cared. Thank you.
Right, sir, your point is noted. On which note, I would like to conclude today's show. Thank you so much, Ms. Halima. Thank you so much, Eliza. Thank you so much, madam. And thank you so much, sir, for your time today. Well, to conclude today's show, we generally spoke about this growing issue of parental neglect, parental abuse, even abandonment as it does stand in the Pakistani society. We spoke about not only its root causes, but also perhaps proposed solutions to the same. Whereas, of course, we as a Pakistani society need to not only advocate for, but also work towards active implementation of more age-inclusive policies, so to speak. We at the same and also need to work towards having greater educational campaigns, mass media awareness campaigns, the aim of which should be instilling those values of respect towards our elderly populations. We need to, as a society, change that basic notion, that basic societal mindset, which unfortunately might still deem elderly persons to be a burden. Rather, we should learn to then construe them as blessings. Thank you for watching The Society. Until next time, take care and Allah Hafiz.